Well, good morning and welcome to today's session, our Church Online Communications Comprehensive. This is now week 12, which is crazy how fast 12 weeks have gone by, or at least for me it's been very fast. For you, may it be a long time. We are pretty much at the end of the summer or past it into the fall. If you're like me, you dropped your kids off at school yesterday, or if you're working in the church office, it's probably a little bit noisier if you've got a school associated with it. But thanks for tuning in and joining us again today. We're going to be talking about search engine optimization. And search engine optimization is a very large topic, and we could spend an entire course on this. And I think I've said that about 6 or 7 times already about the topics that we've covered, because so much of this is really large. So we're going to hit a high-level review of SEO, as it's called, and get into some things that are a little bit more practical for you in the church. And talk about some of the things that would be nice, but you don't have to spend your time on. They're not as critical when you're looking at it at this level. There's people who make their entire jobs out of SEO, and there's enough work to do to do that. But I don't think that's where the church should be placing their emphasis. So we've got a lot of great stuff to cover today, and I will be joined by a special guest who is far more versed in writing for SEO than I am, and so I want to bring on the expert in that rather than rely on my knowledge. So let's switch over to the slides here. If this is your first time joining us, once again, I'm Peter Frank. I'm a Senior Marketing Manager of Church Supplies at Concordia Publishing House. You've got my contact information there, and I'll share it again at the end of the session. I always enjoy getting emails or phone calls from people in the church who have questions or ideas or success stories that they'd like to share. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Again, today we are talking about understanding search engine optimization. And I like to put a question with each one that we're trying to answer. And today I got very specific. It's how do we get our website to show up in Google? And I think that's a very common question that I've received. You've probably had that question asked of you by other people. You may have asked that yourself. And I'm not going to give you a fail-safe way of doing it, because there is no fail-safe way of showing up in Google. There's a lot of factors involved. But hopefully today I'll be able to give you enough information to get you started and to at least climb in the rankings if you're not already at the top. All right, so let's dig in. Here's the outline for today. We're going to first talk about how do search engines work. And there's a lot of misperception on that. I'm just looking at my Facebook feed. I'm hoping that my video is coming across well, because it's sure not coming across well on my screen, but we're going to keep moving. So if you have any problems, just let me know. All right, after we get into how search engines work, we're going to talk about actually defining search engine optimization, especially at the church level, because I think it's a little different than what you might expect, or at least in my mind, it's different than the traditional definition of search engine optimization. We'll ask, why should churches care? You've got enough other things going on, and this gets a little technical. Why is it important? We'll talk about different types of search results and get into the 4 pillars of SEO. And finally, I'll give you some tools to get started. All right, so how search engines work. For many people, the concept of the internet is a little bit vague. The internet is the cloud. It's the things where it's the place where you go online. For some of you, it may just be that little blue E that comes with your Windows computer that you click on and get there. And if it's not that for you, I'm sure you've met people like that. But it's a little bit more complex than that. And what's interesting as you get into the details is that there's different internets, if you will. When you update your website, you're updating a server with your website on it. You're not necessarily updating the internet. So that's the first bullet point today, is that when you go and update it, you're uploaded to a respective server. Now from there, Google or other search engines sends bots or spiders to review the web pages. And these bots create a record of that page on their servers, on their database. They track a copy of that. So when a person enters a query into Google, Google reviews it with all its records of the website and searches for the best result. Now, Google provides results in a recommended order based on everything it knows, but it can only do it based on what it knows. Now, I want to I want to stop here and explain why this is important, because when you update your website, that doesn't mean that you've updated Google. This process of sending bots to review your website and to make a copy of it that it can search is called indexation. And when you think about like the old the library index cards when you go to search for a book, I remember that when I was a little kid, which shows how long ago it's been that those were common. I think most libraries still have all their cards, but I doubt that they keep them up to date. But what you're seeing is a point in time of the history of the books in the library, or at least the current state of those books. And that's what Google is doing when it indexes your site. It's taking it at a single point in time and saying, okay, this is what I know right now about this website. Now, Google will frequently come back, but how frequent they come back is really up to you and what you do on your site, and also up to your users. So a news site that's popular will be indexed repeatedly, almost continuously, several times every hour, if not more frequent than that. A site that gets updated once a month probably won't be indexed more than once a month. Google spends its time where its users spend their time. So your church website probably is not getting millions of views every day. I would almost guarantee it. But you are, depending on how many views you get, Google will be tracking that to see how often they should update your site. So frequent updates and current information is going to encourage Google to update it more. But I just want you to be aware that just because you update your site doesn't mean it's going to show in Google. All right, so that's the nitty-gritty of how search engines work, and there's some great videos out there. Google's even put some together that give a visual demonstration of how this works. So I don't think I need to go into too much. If you're interested in more, I encourage you to search for it. Just go to YouTube and type how search engines work. Now, one other point of clarification, there are many other search engines out there besides just Google, but they don't really matter that much. Like Bing is a popular one, but it's nowhere near as popular as Google, and they're kind of the second most used traditional search engine that's out there. The actual second most used search engine is YouTube, which is owned by Google, leverages Google's tools and algorithms and such. And so that's why we talk about Google most, because they are the main player in the search engine market, and really the only ones you need to be concerned about at a church level. All right, so that's how they work. Let's jump into an actual definition. So search engine optimization is the method of increasing a page's ranking in search results by making a better experience for users through improving on-page, off-page, and technical factors. That's a very fancy way of saying you want to show up in the top of a search engine page. But there's a little bit more to it than that. As search engines have changed, and as Google has changed, the type of results have changed. And we're going to take a look at that. But no longer is it necessarily just to get your website up into Google's rankings. It's to get your church up in the top of these search engine results pages, SERPs or SERPs for short. I don't like using the word SERP, it sounds kind of weird. But on the results page, getting your church's information up at the top, and it may not necessarily be your website. It may be your blog, it could be your social media, it could be different types of accounts. We'll take a look at that in a few minutes. But before we get into that, let's talk about the question that I posed earlier. Why should churches even care about search engine optimization? Why is this an important thing to spend any of your time on? And how much time should you spend on it? Well, first off, it's that increase in rankings in the search results. If somebody is searching for a church in your area, you want to make sure you're found. You don't want them to stumble across a church down the street that may not be professing the gospel and truth and purity. You may want them to just find a church if they're searching. If you're in a rural area, there may not be that many options, and if they're searching, you certainly want your church to come up. And so that's a key part, is to make sure your church comes up. But even more so, thinking about the potential person who's looking for a church, they're more likely going to go to Google than any other means if they're not being invited by somebody personally. So search engines don't take the place of inviting your friends and family and neighbors to church. That is still, from what I hear, the number one way that people join a church is through a personal invitation. But for somebody who's new to an area and doesn't have a personal invitation, they're going to go search on Google. And then they're going to look at your website, and that's a whole different discussion. We've already talked about that, why it's important to have just a great presence for people when they do come to your website, especially when they're looking for a church. So that's a key part. But let's talk about a few other things related to SEO. SEO is also best practices for websites. It doesn't mean that just because you do these things, you're going to show up in the top of Google, because there's so many factors that go into it, and we'll talk about those as we go. But just like we talked when we're talking about emails and canned spam, these canned spam is like legal requirements, government regulations. This is just recommendations that Google is saying, hey, if you do these things, you're going to show up higher. But they are focused on the end user. They're not focused on managing websites and managing website owners so that they don't trick the system. That's part of it. But as they've shifted their focus to be what's best for our searchers, what's best for the person who's looking at it, they're saying what makes the best experience from search to clicking to visiting all the way through. And so the recommendations that they put forward is to really just help their end user and give them the best experience. And so even if you're not concerned about rankings, even if you're already showing up number one, if you're not doing these things, you're not giving your audience the best experience on your website or your blog or anywhere else that they're landing. And so that's reason enough to do it, because as we've talked, everything should be focused on your audience, and practicing these SEO principles is focusing on your audience. All right, so that's the second reason. It goes into the third, the user experience on your site. It just makes it clean and crisp and easy to digest the content that you're putting out there, so that, again, the focus is on your audience. It creates the best website possible. Now, the last one is obviously going to be the most important. It's a great opportunity to share the gospel. All of these things lead to this point. Being able to show up in rankings, being able to have a great experience, all of that helps you more clearly and more widely share the gospel message. And that's what we're here for. It's interesting how other religions view this. And a great example, which is also kind of a sad example, is the Church of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, put a big emphasis on SEO. And if you search any generic terms about faith, about Scripture, more than likely they are going to come up in the top of the results because they've put such a priority on it. Put the emphasis on sharing their teachings and having their churches point back to their main site and using these best practices to drive their message, which we as Christians know is off base. It's not pointing to the true gospel message. And so we're competing against that as Christians. And so SEO and understanding this in the global sense of, the entire world and what messages are being shared to other religions, it really puts high stakes on us to get it right and to make sure that we are doing everything we can to proclaim the gospel through this medium, through the internet, which is just so well utilized day in, day out by just about everybody. So that kind of raises the bar a little bit on why churches should care. And there's only so much that each individual church can do, but as we all up our games a little bit on our church websites, on our blogs, on our social media, it helps create a larger message or a larger audience for this message to be shared. So that's pretty lofty when you think about it, but I don't want us to get lost in that high level, because a lot of what we're going to talk about today is in the weeds. So let's move on to that. I mentioned before how the results, the different types of results is constantly changing and has changed. Let's look at a variety of different results. So we'll switch back here, and I hope that this will be large enough for you to see. By the way, if I should have mentioned this at the beginning, if you're watching this and just to help me see how how the chat's working. If you've been with me, you've known that I've had some trouble with Facebook chat. Go ahead and let me know where you're watching this and any initial thoughts on SEO that you have. If you didn't know Mormons were so good at SEO, put that in the chat box. I'd be happy to share some links later on that show where that is. Maybe I'll put that in the Facebook group. But that'll just help me know. I've got it over here today. Just make sure that the comments are working today. All right, types of search results. Now, the most common type that I think everybody thinks of are the organic results. And the way you can improve that is through search engine optimization. That's where we'll spend a lot of our time. These are the actual results that are, we call them organic because they're not influenced by money. They're not paid. They're not advertisements. These have the best conversion rates. I'm sure if you've searched on Google, you've seen the ads. We'll talk about that next. But often people will just skip over the ads and click on the organic because they know that's the most relevant for them. And so that's where we focus our attention because the people who click on there are the most likely to dig deeper into your site. And again, this is improved by search engine optimization. The next one is those paid ads. And this is influenced by Google AdWords. And you'll always see a little bit of indication. They're looking more and more like the organic results every day. Google has made the distinction less and less, but there's still a little ads icon next to it. And so you can always tell. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing. Now, you have to keep in mind that I am a marketer and I utilize Google AdWords. They're important to me and they work. It's not a bad thing to have your website show up in Google AdWords. And the reason for this is that Google is still, whether it's organic results or paid results, is always focusing on their end user. And so they will not display ads that are not relevant to their users, or at least they sure try not to. And they'll penalize you if you're, as a marketer, doing a bait and switch and putting one thing in your ad and taking people to a different site. There's a bidding process that goes on, so certainly a pay-to-play. The more you pay, the more often your ads will show up. But there's still this level of relevance that Google puts on all advertisers. And so as you search, if you are one of those people who ignore the ads entirely, take a look at the ads as you're going, because there might be some relevant results there. And for a church that doesn't have a lot of time or manpower to put behind updating their website, putting a few dollars behind it may work, especially if you go off of if you're paying for terms that are very specific. Lutheran churches in St. Louis is going to be a much easier and cheaper way to run ads than just Lutheran churches or churches in St. Louis. The more narrow you get, the better chance you have of your ad showing. And this could be really inexpensive for a church. You're only paying for clicks. There's a way to do it by views, but I recommend doing it by clicks just to get started so that your dollars that you spend are always turn into results. And you can also set a limit on it. So when you think about how much you might spend on an annual basis on either sending newsletters or posting signs on community bulletin boards or yellow book pages, you may want to consider putting some of those advertising dollars behind Google AdWords and giving it a try. So there's my spiel. I'm a marketer. You understand that. I do think they're valuable, and they do work. So that's one of them. The next one that you have would be what's called local knowledge graph. And that's when you see something off on the side that is exactly what you're searching for. So if somebody types in your church name, Google's going to show all the specific information that they can. And you would update that through Google My Business. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking on Google My Business. And I think churches often overlook it because of that word business. But think of it as specific public locations where you're inviting strangers to come. And a church is certainly one of those places where somebody you don't know could easily show up at your door and be welcome, just like a restaurant or any other or any business. So you can set up a lot of this information by creating a Google My Business account. It'll help you determine what kind of presence your site shows up with in Google Maps. and allow you to put things like phone number or hours, things like that. And those are organic, but they show up really big and bold and a high click-through rate. They're very well received by searchers. So I highly encourage you to do that. Again, I could get into more detail on that, but we've got a lot to cover, and I don't think that's pretty straightforward. You don't need a lot of help setting that up. All right, next we have what's called a local pack. This is the same kind of thing, but if there are multiple results, so like the search that I have there, I know it's kind of small, but you can do this on your own. Search for churches and then put in my city, or even churches near me will show you something like this. And it's taking that same information but giving you less real estate. Now, these 4 things here, I think, are the ones that you have to be most concerned about at the church level. I think this, from a visitor perspective, is where you have the greatest opportunity to attract new people to your church who are searching for a church in your area. What we're going to move into next is to help give you a better understanding of what other types of search results come up, but I don't think you should spend much time focusing on those other than what makes sense in your overarching communication strategy. So those are where I want you to focus. Let's take a look at, I think it's another 8 or 10. All right, first off, image search. I'm sure you've used that. Hopefully you haven't used these images in presentations or PowerPoint slides, or certainly not in your website, but you can search for images and they show up. So I put Martin Luther there. A lot of what you can do to make your images show up is what we're going to talk about later on with search engine optimization. But most people are not searching for images of your church, so that's why I don't think it's that necessary. Same kind of thing with video. I mentioned before, YouTube is owned by Google. It's a great search engine. Your YouTube videos will show up here. Now, while this is a great opportunity for sharing the gospel, I don't think this is necessarily, if you're putting video up for search engine purposes, that's probably not the best use of your time, but it may be part of your strategy. So that's another type of result. Social media, especially Twitter, is showing up in search engines or in Google. They had nixed that for a while and then brought it back. It's still something that you can do right now. But as we talked last week in social media, I don't think Twitter is where churches need to be spending as much of their time. Knowledge graph, which is especially for brands. This is similar to what we talked about before, but more overarching brands. You can see CPH on there. If you search any brand name, Coca-Cola or AT&T, they're certainly going to have something come up. This is through a thing called Wikimedia, which is tied in with Wikipedia. I don't think that's an area that churches need to focus on, but it's showing up more and more. Shopping, you'll certainly get those kind of results. There's a Lutheran Study Bible. That's not an area that churches need to focus on, but of course that is one way that Google runs their business, a different type of ad. So you'll see those depending on what search term you put up. Rich answers. This one we'll talk about briefly in a little bit more detail. This is where if a question is asked in the search and Google can find that question in an answer on a website, they'll return it in a different format that looks like a Q&A. Now, I don't think that churches should go off and start creating tons of Q&A sections, because from a user standpoint, that's not the best experience. But if you think about those things on your website where there are questions that people may ask and answers, especially on a theology page, that might be a great way for your church to show up there. And I know of a church in the St. Louis area who has a very good post on the difference between Lutherans and Catholics. And that often shows up for that generic question, what's the difference between Lutherans and Catholics? So there's some value there. I wouldn't focus your time on it too much. Again, if you're focused on showing up in the top of rankings, your attention is off the main mark. You should be focused on what's best for your audience. When you can do these things, certainly do them. But don't prioritize that. Okay, so rich answers. There's a schema that goes with that. That's far more technical than I want to get into today. News. This is certainly not somewhere that you'll be showing up, but these are the type of results that'll show up. And they look at magazines and media outlets for news stories. These are the sites they index frequently. almost constantly. And lastly, carousels. There's a variety of different carousels, most of which don't apply for the church. But if you're looking for like movie releases or something, you'll see that, or DVD releases, or places to visit this weekend. Especially like when I travel and I look at things to do in Baltimore, which was a search that I put in earlier in the summer, I would get a carousel result of all of those different attractions. So those are the types of results that you could get. Let's move into the 4 pillars of SEO. And this is the fun section. And I can't claim this theory as my own. I took several different digital marketing courses at a local college. And in my SEO class that I took, this is what Ivan Temelkoff, my instructor, who works with a lot of different brands in the St. Louis area, he put together this construction of SEO, and I thought it was just such a great outline that makes sense for me. And that's why I'm sharing it with you today. But I don't want to take any credit for it because it certainly wasn't my idea. And if you search for 4 pillars of SEO, you'll see a number of different ideas using that same term. It's not like an industry standard term either. And there's a lot of great other pillars out there, if you will. They look at it in different angles. So the 4 pillars, the factors that you need to be concerned about, start off with on-site factors. These are the things that you can do on your website, on your blog, on whatever kind of web presence you have that could influence search results. There's some off-site factors which are more or less off-site, but they're less things that you can do from a content perspective and more from what you can do from a technological perspective. We'll get into those in a minute. Now, that's different than the technical factors. These are the things that Google is looking at your site. And these get pretty technical. And then the last one is your audience, of which you have no control over at all. So the types of results that Google shows will be based on who your audience is. And that, well, we'll get into that in more details, but that's certainly not something that you can change, who your audience is, what their history is like. So those are the 4 pillars. We're going to spend the most time on our first one, our on-site factors. And for that, I have a special guest, and I'm going to go ahead and set up the camera. So we're going to talk about writing for SEO, and pardon any noise that comes across as I move the microphone and camera. So we'll get this set up and make sure that the view is good. I'm not in a formal studio. Just one second. Well, I am joined today by Erica Goldman. Erica works on our team here in the Church Supplies group at CPH. Erica, tell us a little bit about yourself and your title and all that you do here.
Sure. Well, like Peter said, I work on the marketing team here at CPH. I am specifically a copywriter, so I'm not a huge SEO whiz. But when it comes to the types of content you're going to be putting on your church's website and what you can do for SEO to influence how that performs, I can give you guys a few things to get started, and hopefully it's not too overwhelming because I have a lot to go over. I've been here at CPH for about 2 years. I worked more with books a bit at first, and now more specifically with church supplies, like with Peter, on CTS and music and those kinds of things. So anyway, the first thing that I wanted to talk about, if it's working.
Oops, click on there. There we go.
All right. The first thing is keywords. So for each page on your site, you really just want to focus on one main keyword or key phrase. So in the past, we kind of had to keyword stuff, which is like cramming as many keywords as you can into one page to really trigger those search engines to pull up your page. But now Google, their algorithm is a lot more refined than that. So they'll actually penalize sites that do that. So basically for one page, say you have one page about Bible studies, one page about small groups, something like that. Just really kind of organizing your site well and then focusing on one topic or within that one main keyword or key phrase on each page. And so a really important way to go about doing that is to do some good keyword research. So one of the tools that I almost always use for that is Google Keyword Finder. Oh, that's all right. There we go. Do keyword research. So Google Keyword Finder, what you can do with that is you can type in maybe one keyword or one key phrase, and then that will tell you how many hits or how many times that's usually searched. I think is every month or so. So you'll see how well that keyword can perform, if it has a lot of competition or not much competition. And then you can also get some other ideas for keywords that might perform better or as well or something. And then I'll also just start Googling the thing that I want to write about and see kind of what's already out there. So that's a good way just to kind of, rather than just choosing a word off the bat, getting like a slightly more informed decision about what my main keyword is going to be for each page.
Can you share an example or something that a church might be thinking about where they might be going between different phrases?
Sure.
Or an example of what you've done before, too. Sorry to put you on the
That's
spot.
okay. It's hard to think of an example right off the top of my head.
Well, maybe going into that next section or your next slide.
Yeah, I was actually going to think about, like, for instance, for CTS, which you can probably see in the next slide, I think that the main keyword we probably want to use for this is something like church management software. So making sure to put that main keyword in there, and then if we're going to have a specific page on the website about seminars for Church 360 members or something, making sure to put seminars and then Church 360 members in there. Maybe like Peter was saying earlier about like Lutheran churches in St. Louis, or I'm from the Detroit area, so I might say Lutheran churches in Detroit or Lutheran churches in Novi, which is the town that I'm from. So maybe something kind of more specific like that. Just really thinking about what's your audience going to be thinking, what are they going to be looking for, kind of most specifically, and what can you use to make it the easiest for them to find the information on your website. Does that answer it?
Absolutely. I think the city kind of thing too. Like I'm in Afton, Missouri, but I know that people who are searching for St. Louis. They're almost interchangeable. But if I don't put St. Louis anywhere on my website, then I'm going to be lost when people search for that.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. Well, the next thing that I wanted to talk about is page titles and meta descriptions, which kind of go together. For page titles, this is the biggest thing that you're going to need to think about, or between page titles and meta descriptions, the page title is where the keyword really is more important. So within a search result, this is just a quick screenshot that I got, the page title is going to be the link in the blue that people are going to be clicking on, and that is also going to be at the top of a browser, like the tab. So for instance, if you have like several tabs open in your browser, the page title is going to be the little text that shows up there. So another thing to keep in mind is to try to get the keywords closer to the front. So for instance, say you have a page on your website about your staff, another page about events going on, another page about small groups. You might want to put staff at the beginning, small groups at the beginning, rather than at the end, because if somebody has a bunch of tabs open and they're all for your website, if you just have your church name at the beginning, people aren't going to know which one is which when they're trying to switch in between them. And Google does look at page titles and the keywords in there to try to figure out which search results it's going to pull up. So page title is definitely an important spot to put your keyword, but again, don't stuff it too much. Just focus on your one main keyword, and then after that, just kind of write naturally. And also remember that this is a place, the page title is a place where you're going to have to entice people to click. So kind of balancing working for the software, which is having a keyword in there, and then, but mostly just writing for human beings and thinking what's best for them and what's going to make it the easiest for them to find what they're looking for. And then for the length of your page titles, I think it's actually based on pixels. Is that right, Peter?
That's correct, yep.
But since nobody really, as a writer, I don't know how long a pixel is, but in terms of characters, you could probably go between 50 and 60 characters, and any longer than that, it'll probably get cut off. So try to keep it under 60. And then the next thing is for meta descriptions, which is the gray text underneath. For meta descriptions, these don't actually really affect, like, say the keywords that are in meta descriptions Google doesn't look at a meta description to figure out whether or not that it needs to pull up that page. So a meta description is mostly just kind of explanation about what's on the page, also kind of enticing people to click, and it also kind of shows that your site that the page is trustworthy. So you're kind of proving that what is in the page title is actually what is on the page. So again, not trying to clickbait at all. And then in terms of length for meta descriptions, usually over 160 characters is where it tends to get cut off, and that includes spaces. Sometimes it's like 155, so just kind of somewhere around there. And then another thing also with meta descriptions is that even if you write a really good meta description that you're like, everybody needs to read this, sometimes Google will show a different little line of text under there depending on what the person searched for. So if you see somebody searching for your website and your meta description doesn't show up in the search result page, don't freak out, because it's probably something that has to do with Google's algorithm, that what they think they put there is the best thing for what the user's looking for. All right, so the next thing, kind of actually getting into what's on the page itself, is for headings. So in terms of coding your site, and again, I'm not a total whiz for coding, but only use one H1, and the H1 is going to be the highest level heading on your site. Probably is also going to be just kind of like saying what page you're on, just to orient the user. And the H1 is a really important thing that search engines look at in terms of keywords. So I would say just be straightforward and transparent about what's on the page and try to get that one main keyword or key phrase in the H1. And then for the next level heading, that would be H2s. So try not to use too many of those. Peter, isn't it something maybe just like 3 or so max?
Well, you want as few as possible. Even one is probably the best, but some sites lend themselves to others. I think it's important to not think of H1s or H2s as the size of the font, which many sites are set up in that way, but in terms of structuring your content in that way. So, but yeah, certainly use a limited number of that.
All right, and then I think the other thing I already said was try to keep your main keyword or key phrase within those headings. But again, you don't need to stuff it, just what works best for the user. Yep, like use the main keyword or key phrase once or so. It's not like a total rule. Again, just kind of keeping the user in mind first. And then moving more within to the page, if you're looking at the body text of the page, this is another place where we would probably sometimes feel the urge to want to shove the keyword in there as many times as we need to. But really we don't need to do that, so use it once, twice, use some alternative phrases, but for the most part just write naturally about the thing you're writing about. And then the way that the Google algorithm is set up, it will recognize that like these words relate to this topic, so it'll figure it out. So just write naturally, write for human beings overall. And again, don't keyword stuff. And then another thing which kind of relates to text a little bit is links on a page. So Peter talked before about, I think it's on-site and off-site factors. In terms of on-site factors, we have outbound links. So those are the links that are within a page that point to a different page, whether it's on our website or on a different website. And then there's the inbound links, which are the places that like links that point to our site from other people's websites. So we can't really control the inbound links a whole lot, but we can definitely control the outbound links. And then in terms of the copy that is within those links, you definitely want to point toward like more of a specific resource. Like for instance, if you're talking about, we recently talked on Facebook about such and such thing. The link for Facebook, you probably don't need to link to the homepage of the website because that's easy for people to find. You might want to link to something more specific, like the specific post or something like that. So just making sure that you're using your links as intelligently as you can. And then the next thing is to use keywords within those links, whether it's an in-text link or it's a button. For instance, say you have a line of text that says, download a sample Bible study. As a writer, I'm used to like accentuating the verbs the most, so my instinct would be to link download, that word. But actually, for SEO, it's better to link the keywords. So in this case, I might actually link the words sample Bible study, or whatever it was I said at first. So whether that's in an in-text link or a button, make sure to use some keywords in there as well, because Google looks a lot at links to determine I think it's the authority of your site, or how legit it is, basically.
I think one of the most interesting things I learned in my SEO class is that the most competitive keyword phrase on the internet is click here, because of that exact reason. Like, you're thinking that you want to call people to action, but all of a sudden that's putting the emphasis on those words rather than the result of the action. So yeah, that's a great point.
And then the last thing that I wanted to cover was images, and more specifically like the words and stuff that we use kind of behind the images, the things that the user isn't really going to see. So the first thing is to use specific file names. So rather than like the letters and numbers that your camera or your phone might generate when it takes that image, make it something more specific, like explaining what is actually in the image itself. And in terms of keywords, might want to use a keyword there too, but just kind of keeping it short but actually specific, so you know, or if somebody wants to download that file or something, so they actually know what the file is itself. The next thing is to include alt text for images, and alt text stands for alternative text. So that is the text that if the image doesn't load, that text would be displayed instead. Or if somebody's using a screen reader, like if they're visually impaired, that's the text that's going to show up as well. So alt text can probably be kind of similar to the file name, maybe. You don't want to have it be like a whole sentence long, but just something that explains this is what is in this image in case the image doesn't load for somebody.
And that's especially important too as you get into Google image search. So Google split, if you put a picture of your church on your website, if you put Salem Lutheran Church in Afton, Missouri, then that image will be associated with any of those search results. And so that's the kind of like clear writing that you're talking.
Yeah, definitely, and especially if somebody is going to be visiting a church for the first time and they want to know, what does this church look like? And if they don't find an image on your website itself and they Google it and that image shows up, then that could be really helpful. Yeah,
rather than putting like picture of church from the street.
Exactly, yeah. And then again, maybe just try to fit that main keyword or key phrase in maybe one image's alt text. I don't think alt text is like the most essential place to put it, but I think it can be important. Or if, like Peter was saying, it's for an image search. If it's an image you think is really important, then you definitely might want to have a keyword or a key phrase in there somewhere. So I think that's about all that I have right now. I know that was kind of a lot to go over. I put all of that stuff on there's a blog post I wrote on the CTS blog recently. I think it's called Basic SEO for Web Writing. So all of that info is in there, and then in the free download that Peter's going to talk about at the end, all the information is in there as well. So if you have any questions or just kind of overwhelmed about all of it, then that can help you a bit too.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you very much for being here to share that. You do this day in and day out, and it's great to have these reminders when I work with you on different projects, because it doesn't come naturally. Like, you have to think intentionally about this. It's not necessarily more work to do the right way versus the wrong way, but the thought process is key. And if you don't understand these things, you won't even think about them. So, well, thank you very much. We're going to move into off-site factors. I'm switching equipment around, so hopefully I haven't been too loud in doing that. Off-site factors, like we mentioned before, there are some things that you can influence here. The first one that we're going to talk about is trust. And this goes back to what Erica was talking about, our users giving the experience that they expect. You know, this you may hear of bait and switch, where your link says one thing and then the results of the page say another. A meta description describes what people should expect. And for one, if you're putting in a meta description, that certainly means you're intentional about giving them that exact experience. So trust is a key thing. Are users giving that experience that you say they'll have? Engagement. Do users stay and navigate deeper into the site? And I've got a question from Stephen about Google Analytics, if we're going to dig into that, and we'll talk about it a little bit. This is the kind of stuff that Google Analytics shows you. Are people bouncing, which means as soon as they get to your site, clicking the back button? Are they clicking on the links? That kind of thing. So are they actually engaging within your site? By the way, before I go too far, Erica, there is a comment from one of our attendees, David Grimmer. He says he's in Northville near Novi. So.
Oh, yay!
It's fantastic to build those connections. It's a small little world we live in. Okay, so next up on here, after engagement, is popularity, and this is this I always think back to the old website design where you had the little counters at the bottom, and it would just click up every time somebody visited your site, and there's still some sites out there that have that. That's another thing that Google Analytics will show you is how many people are coming to your site. You can't really influence that directly. Certainly indirectly, by doing these things and driving people to your site, you'll drive up the popularity. So that's kind of an off-site, meaning out of your individual page controls, that you'll want to keep in mind affects the search results. Oh, too far. Backlinks. Erica mentioned that before. Those are also known as like inbound links. Are people bringing your are the people directing users or your audience to your site? And this is where great content comes into play. If you've got a really engaging blog post or a really timely blog post, I've seen a lot of those by churches, blog posts about what's happening in Charlottesville this last weekend. Churches talking about that and how we as Christians respond. Those are shared on social media or on other blogs or other websites. That kind of stuff drives people to your site too. And while it may be driving your members to your site, it's driving people. And so Google sees that there's timely and relevant and engaging content on your site. So if you didn't have another reason to have a blog, SEO is a good reason for a blog, because that's the kind of things that people link to. Most people aren't going to be linking to your worship times page, even though that's important to have. It's just not something that people are sharing regularly. Or your church staff page. I don't think you'll get too many inbound links with that. History, and this is not history of the church, but has this site been accessed by the user before? This also gets into audience a little bit, so we'll talk about that more there. But that's something that's kind of off the site, but still related to your page. And then user, who they are, where are they, and what do they do? So that'll go into audience a little bit more as well. Technical factors that you should consider. And I found a stock image about code on the screen just to show how technical we're actually getting. Site architecture, logical use of subdomains and directories. We can talk about this a lot. We've got some blog posts on this subject too. And this goes into what Erica was describing as well, related to page title and stuff, that it should all flow logically. And if you go to our website, like you'll have concordiatechnology.org/church360/members/features or something like that, where those are subdirectories where everything follows this nice logical flow. It used to be that this was the exact folder system on your server, and anymore it's not so much that as much as you can kind of mock it up through the page name, through the actual file name of the page. And this is this architecture presents a very logical way for Google to look at your site and understand what's on those pages, what's subsequent information from there. So that's, again, rather technical, not as technical as some of the things we're getting. Let's throw out an acronym, an XML sitemap. This is basically the map of your site. And there's some great free tools out there. Just Google XML sitemap generator, and it'll browse your site and create a file for you. And while it may not be 100% perfect, it'll be better than nothing. And so this is just a structured document that tells search engines, or Google specifically, how to read your site. And you could create this by hand, but it's far too much work for the value that'll be gained. Another thing is robots.txt or text. It's a listing of pages to not index. And so if you have like a sign-in page to your website, like if you're using Church 360 Unite and you say, okay, members go here to sign in, you don't really need that index. That doesn't need to show up in search results. Those are the kind of things that can be included on a robots.txt file. Anything that you want to tell a search engine to ignore would show up on there. And it's just called robots because it's robots that's looking at it. It's not individual people. So that's a file that you can upload. I'm getting into these technical things and going quickly because I don't think you should spend too much time on this. If you have a web designer who knows this stuff, they should spend their time on that. But if you're a pastor or an office administrator, it's good to know about these things, but they often don't take priority. Another thing is the indexation, that technical factor we talked about before. Has this page been indexed recently? And there's a tool that I'll show you that gives you a better idea of that. And lastly, site performance, responsiveness from both a speed and a device standpoint. So how quickly does your page load? And it used to be more on desktop, but now it's all about mobile. Does your page load quickly on mobile? And does it look nice when it's on a mobile device? Is it mobile responsive or mobile compatible? I've heard different numbers, but the one that I hear most commonly is 3 seconds. If your page doesn't load in 3 seconds, people are just hitting the back button. And that seems like such a short time frame, but as I look at websites and I'm just browsing in the evenings, if I'm on my phone and something is taking more than a few seconds, I'll just assume that, okay, this site's going to have too much content, my phone's going to take too long to load, I'm just going to back up and go to the next one. And especially from a browsing perspective, if I'm looking for a specific site, I'll wait for it. But if I'm just looking in and casually browsing through different websites, I'm not going to wait long. And most people are like me in that they're very impatient. Our devices and how quick technology has gotten has led us to be this impatient with technology and hitting the back button too frequently. All right, that's technical factors. That's the third of 4 pillars. The last pillar is user information. And I used this same icon as we talked about persona profiles. And this is information that you could also put in a generic sense in your persona profile. So where have they visited? What have they searched for previously? Where are they located? What are their demographics? All of these things that are all about the person who's searching, Google takes into account in returning search results. And so if I'm looking, we'll go back to the Baltimore example. If I'm looking for hotels in Baltimore, the first time I search, it's going to focus on my query. The second time I search, it's going to say, where have you gone before? You know, oh, I see Peter made a reservation at this hotel. Well, I'm going to make sure that shows up first next time Peter searches for hotels in Baltimore. It's going to look at my demographics of being a male in my 30s. If I filled that out through like a Gmail profile or other things, it's going to take that into account and say, okay, what have other males in their 30s clicked on when they had a similar search query? So all of this is stuff that you can't control, but Google certainly takes into account. And since you can't control it, it's not something you should spend too much time thinking about when you're building your pages, but rather as you're building your persona profiles and you're building your pages to meet those profiles' expectations, that's where it all starts to come together. And if you do your work on the front end of putting this information in profiles, then as you have these standards in place as you're building up new pages on your website or posting new blog posts, you're kind of already used to that and have this person in mind. And certainly if there's somebody who doesn't fit your persona profile who's searching, it'll still impact it, but you can't spend time accounting for all of those differences among your potential audience. So that's where all of this that we're talking about from a strategy standpoint really ties together nicely. So those are some of the things that are affected by users. We talk about a few tools to get started, and then we're going to wrap up here. So first off, website access. And I know this sounds silly, but as you are thinking about search engine optimization, about SEO, if you don't have access, and I mean real access to your website, there's only so much you can do. Now, depending on what content management system you're using, what CMS is what that stands for, you may not have access to the code, which means that you can't look for some of the things like meta description, header, H1 or H2 tags. You want to make sure that you can see it. Now, most good CMSs certainly allow you that access even at a low-level user. Even if you're not doing all the technical stuff, if you're just putting up content, you should be able to see this. Church 360 Unite, our product, certainly does, and we continually make changes to improve SEO options for you. But I say that because it's not a given. It's not a given that you're going to have all the access you need. And that's, of course, clearly the most important tool that you need is your website. Next up, Google Analytics. And that's the thing that Stephen asked about before. If you have not set up a Google Analytics account, I highly recommend you do that. Google Analytics is a free tool that Google provides that gives you insight into your website. And what it requires is a tracking code placed on every single page of your site that when the site loads, it sends information back to Google. Now, for a technical person, this is not too hard to get set up. If you are a novice or not a techie, then there's a little bit of work involved. And Google understands that, and they've created a lot of help documents for that. We had a presentation on Google Analytics from Reverend Bill Johnson, who's at the Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne. He put together a lot of great things. It's a short 20-minute one, but it gives a high-level overview on that. And that's available on our YouTube channel at CTS. And so that's something we could share probably in the notes later on, or I'll add that in the comments later on this post. Just so you can get a little bit more details. But it talks about, or it shows you a lot of the things we've talked about, like how many visitors you have on your site, where are they coming from, where are they clicking once they're on your site, how much time do they spend on each page. All of those things that you'll want to monitor. Google Analytics is a very deep hole that you can get into that can be a lot of fun if you're data minded and can take you a lot of time to get back out of. I don't spend as much time in analytics as I should. We have a few other analytics tools that we use that are much more specific to our needs, but there's so much you can do in analytics. And again, it's all free. Google is focusing on the end user, and if they provide tools for website owners to do better work on their website, that just ultimately leads down to a better path for users. So Google has this very long game in mind, which I think is fantastic. And for you in the church with limited budgets, it works out very well to your advantage. All right, next up, another Google tool, you'll see some trends here, is the Google Search Console. You may have heard of this before. It used to be called Google Webmaster Tools. They still have google.com/webmasters as the URL for it. This is really all about how your website works with search. Now, one thing that I'm sure you're thinking, it'd be really helpful to see what search terms people are typing in before they come to our website. Yes, it would. And for a while that was in Google Analytics, and then they stripped all of that out because people were keyword stuffing and using that to kind of game the system. They've lightened up a little bit by putting this back into Search Console to a certain extent. They don't show everything, and I don't know all the details of what why they show what they show. But you'll be able to see more of these search terms in Google Search Console. You'll also be able to see indexation information when it was last indexed. You could put in requests for Google to index it from Search Console. It's also a free tool. It links to Google Analytics. It's a little bit more technical. If you are not a techie, it may take some thinking to get through. But it's a valuable tool, and I don't go into it often because once you get things set up and running, it's especially valuable for finding out problems. If all of a sudden traffic drops, then you may be able to see the reasons why. So that's a great free tool. I recommend you get that set up as well. Google Trends. This is a fun one. Again, it's kind of can be a black hole that you can lose a lot of time in that's not always that valuable, but it allows you to see trends on searches. Now, going back to what Erica was talking about from a keyword research standpoint, this is very valuable. If there are different trends that you want to see, even based on like geographics, what are people in this area searching for? what phrases to use, that's very helpful. You can see how word choice has changed over time. Now, it's not going to have a lengthy history. You're not going to be able to be like, well, what did people call this in the 1980s? Because Google wasn't around in the 1980s, nor does it really matter for your website. But as you're thinking about what are people searching for today, or if you're doing a timely topic, you may want to see, what phrase is being used most or more often in the last couple months than last year, something like that. That may help as you're typing in key, or as you're putting in keyword research, key phrases. I think about even naming it. I know like fall festivals have a number of different names. Some may call it like trunk or treat or something. Those kind of phrases, Google Trends is great to do, to look up and just see, okay, what are people calling it these days? So again, a free tool from Google. And lastly, another free tool called Mozbar. Now, if you really want to get into SEO, Moz.com, M-O-Z.com, is your key source. And they've got a lot of great content they put up on their blog and social media. They are the experts in search engine optimization, and they monitor changes and trends and all that. The Mozbar is a free tool that they give you that you can use in Google Chrome that allows you to see, to research on any given site what kind of SEO stuff is put in place. Now, from your perspective, I would recommend doing it to look at your site and see where there's opportunities. It can be embarrassing sometimes, so please don't go look at all of our sites because you'll see some things that we're missing. But it'll tell you, okay, what is the H1 here? What is the H2 or H3, or what all is included in those? What's the meta description, the title? How does a search engine view our site is essentially what you're looking at. And that helps you make those changes, make informed changes to your site. So that one's a little bit lengthier of a URL, moz.com/products/pros/SEO toolbar. You could also just go to moz.com and search for toolbar on there. They make it easy to get to, but I wanted to give that exact link. So those are the 5 things that I would suggest if you really want to dig into this and get started, or even if you're wanting a surface level understanding. That's where I'd begin. And if you can't see this well, I know sometimes our screen is a little bit small on Facebook. I would recommend that you download the slide deck. I'll be sending that out in an email later on today. All right, so we're going to wrap up here because I've gone over an hour. I can be a little long-winded, as you've seen, and I'm also losing my voice, so it's a good time to wrap up. All right, so the summary for today. Whoops, I already was on that slide. First off, think about quality. As you're looking at SEO, quality websites, quality blogs is really what it comes down to. Think about it quality from a user's perspective. Is the content of value? Do they stay and read it? Will they share it? Do others link to it? That's a key theme throughout all of what we're talking about. Current, keep your content timely. Google is looking at when it was written, if it's been updated, if the information is still relevant based on how your audience reacts. Also think substantive. Is there enough information that Google can understand it, that your users can understand it, and is it supported? Do people link to it? Does it link to other relevant sites? Do you provide ways for people to get more information even if it's not on your site? And lastly, and most importantly, write for people. Is your website, and we probably could even say, use a different verb than written, is it designed, is it meant for people? Is it natural language, or is it stuffed with keywords? Are the images and links used relevant? Is it useful? All of that is things to keep in mind as you're focused on search engine optimization. For more information and a good summary of today's presentation, you can go to our blog, concordiatechnology.org/blog, just like every week. We posted that this morning, and that does link to an SEO checklist. And I'm going to switch screens real quick to show what that looks like. Erica put together this checklist and shared it on our blog a few weeks ago, and we're repurposing it again for this week because that's our topic. But if you go, oops, too fast. If you go in and download this, you'll get two things. One is SEO best practices. This is something I put together. This is more one-time stuff that you can print out, make it your checklist. And then this writing for SEO on the right-hand side is what Erica put together, and it's just fantastic things to keep in mind. Goes over everything that she covered. And as you're doing a blog post or as you're updating a page, if you go through this, you'll be able to have just solid SEO value in your site that gives not just what Google is looking for, but what your users need as they go. So that's our free download for the week. I highly encourage you to go and get that. Then also, if you haven't joined the Church Online Communications Comprehensive Facebook group, I encourage you to do that. We're going to be wrapping up in a couple weeks, and so that's a good way for me to dialogue with you. I haven't done as much as I would like just because of time constraints, but our polls that we've been doing have been very helpful to me just to get an idea of where our audience is at. Join us next week for Saving Time in Your Online Communications. This will be looking at pulling everything we've talked about together. It's a lot. How do you do all of it? And we'll take a look at some strategies for how to best put this into practice without having it consume not just your professional life, but your daily life as well. And so we've got some strategies we'll put in place. So that'll be next Thursday, same time, same channel. I feel like I'm on Batman every time I say that. Then there's really only these 2 weeks left. Next week's about saving time, and next week's about sharing your excitement about your communication strategy. Really, how do you roll it out? And I hope you are excited about it. I'm certainly excited about it for you in terms of getting the strategy in place for your congregation. But that is it for today. So let me switch back here to the camera. Thank you very much for joining me. Erica, thank you for joining as our guest today. That was very helpful for us and for me and for our audience. So thank you for being here, and thank you for tuning in. Once again, join us next week for Saving Time. And there is my contact information. If you need to reach out to me for anything, please feel free, go right ahead. So with that, have a great rest of the day, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.